You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to discuss the threefold state and the New World Order. This is going to be an interesting breakdown tonight. We're going to explore these avenues that have been taken by these folks in positions of power in this world and how they've weaponized almost every aspect of our social order against us. And we're going to explore the relationship between many of the philosophies that have been put forward by some very leading figures in these various occult fraternities and these secret society movements. And we're going to explore particularly the concept that Rudolf Steiner came up with called the threefold state. And we're going to relate that to the New World Order here as well. So tonight we'll be reading from a book titled Trail of the Serpent, written by an insider within these secret society groups, one who saw what was going on and decided to connect all the dots for people. Now keep in mind, sometimes when we read a book like this, these people have certain biases that they are very much led by, and that's okay. We all have these biases to some degree or another. I have my biases. I'm sure everybody out there has theirs. But you need to understand the information is important, and it is something that we should consider. The viewpoints given are ones we should consider. And we need to make a determination on our own as to the accuracy of certain things here. And I always caution you, take some of this stuff with a grain of salt, because there's always these inherent biases. And there's always going to be probably some mistakes made, because none of us are perfect. None of us are perfect, and we all sometimes miss the mark. And when we do, sometimes we miss the mark by a lot, but sometimes we get pretty close. And I think for the most part, this is pretty close. So let's go ahead and we'll read into the book here. We'll get started right into the meat of the matter here right away. For those who desire to learn, we publish today the first of a series of articles by a person that goes by the initials GG, or also the name Dargon, a writer who has made a study of secret societies. The purpose of The Anatomy of Revolution is not to take the reader deeply into any part of the subject, but to give a general and historical view of that complex of subversive organization which is working for the destruction of Christianity, of civilization, and of the British Empire. The writer, who is a true Briton and a good patriot, has one purpose only, to warn the British public of the unsuspected danger which, as he believes, and we believe also, imminently threatens us. So to quote this person, this GG, also known as Dargon, quote, here's what this person says. Here we must note that there has always been among the arcane societies a dual movement. On the one hand, mystical, on the other, political. Such esoteric bodies as the Fraternity of the Rosy Cross, the Martinists, the Swedenborgians, and theosophists have consisted, no doubt largely, of harmless enthusiasts to whom mysticism or magic appealed. But they have also been used as the cover for political intrigue, and as a net wherein to catch, test, and select persons who could be used for subversive ends. For it is one of the methods of the Revolutionary Directorate to use, wherever possible, harmless bodies as their cloak, and innocent people as their unconscious agents. I may refer briefly to the existence of an offshoot of the Theosophical Society, known as the Anthroposophical Society. This was formed as the result of a schism in the ranks of the Theosophists by a man of Jewish birth who was connected with one of the modern branches of the Carbonari. Not only so, but in association with another theosophist, he is engaged in organizing certain singular commercial undertakings not unconnected with communist propaganda. almost precisely in the manner in which Count Saint Germain organized his dye works and other commercial ventures with a like purpose. And this queer business group has its connections with the Irish Republican movement, and also with another mysterious group which was founded by Jewish intellectuals in France about 4 years ago, and that would be around 1918, as this book was written in 1922, folks, and which includes in its membership many well-known politicians, scientists, university professors, and literary men in France, Germany, America, and England. It is a secret society, although nominally a right-wing society. It is in direct touch with members of the Soviet government, Russia. End quote. And that is what this gentleman, G.G., also known as Dargon, had to say. So let's continue reading here and see what else we could garner from this book here, from this work of this author, who put this book together, compiled this information from various sources, and also had personal experience within these organizations. We have from time to time written of Dr. Rudolf Steiner's Gnostic teachings and political activities. We now give a short summary of Edward Schuray's introduction to his translation of Steiner's book, Mystères Charitables et les Mystères Antiques, 1908. Schuray considered Steiner's teaching most luminous. It was so-called Christian Illuminism, but much later left him because of his political activities, of which he did not approve. Later again, he returned to the fold. Our interest in this sketch of Steiner's life is that it shows how, from early years, he was watched, astrally prepared and directed by some mysterious master and initiator whose name and mission are not revealed. According to Schuray, who was a Jew, Steiner was born in Upper Austria in 1861, and his youth was spent on the confines of Styria, the Carpathians, and Hungary. At the age of 15, he made the acquaintance of a learned botanist who, quote, had the gift of seeing the vital principles of the plants, their etheric bodies, and what occultists called the elementals of the vegetable world, end quote. His calm, coldly scientific conversation only further excited the curiosity of the young man. Steiner knew later that this strange man was an envoy from the Master, whom he did not yet know, but who was to become his real initiator and who already supervised him from afar. From his talks with the botanist, he was soon convinced that the basis of the great universal was the double current which constitutes the movement of the world, the flux and reflux of the universal life force, this occult and astral current, which is the great propeller of life with its hierarchy of powers. I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. This could also be describing what we would call electromagnetic phenomenon, which I think underlies a lot of these various things. This is the power that I think Steiner was referring to in one way, shape, or form, at least here in the physical realm, in the physical sense, the electromagnetic principles. This would be this life force, this universal life force, this flux and reflux, the ebb and flow of these energetic principles in this reality. So that's what they say, the great propeller of life with its hierarchy of powers. Let's continue on now. From the age of 18, Steiner felt the double current. He had from that time the irrefutable sensation of occult powers who acted behind and through him to direct him. He listened to this force and followed its warnings because he felt himself profoundly in accord with it. When 19, he met his master, for so long sensed, who was one of those powerful men who live unknown to the world in order to accomplish a mission. Ostensibly, they do not act upon human events. Incognito is the condition of their strength, making their action only more efficacious, for they arouse, prepare, and direct those who act in the public eye. And Steiner's mission, according to himself, was, quote, to link together science and religion, bring God into science and nature into religion, and so fecundate a new art and life, end quote. His master was eminently a spiritual male, as opposed to Steiner's more feminine sensibilities. He was a formidable dominator for whom individuals scarcely existed. He spared neither himself nor others. His will was like a bullet from a gun which went straight to its aim and swept all from its path. Such was the powerful mind which dominated and used Steiner as a mere automaton, pulling the strings as his terrible ambitions required. For Steiner, 1881 to 1891 was a period of study and preparation at Vienna. From 1891 to 1901, a time of struggle and combat at Weimar. From 1901 to 1907, a time of action and organization at Berlin. About 1890, Steiner said, quote, "The occult powers who were directing me obliged me imperceptibly to penetrate into the current ideas of spiritualists," end quote. He came in touch with Nietzsche and Haeckel, who oriented him intellectually. As Schure said, quote, "He had the presentiment that in the incontestable discoveries of the naturalist, he would find the surest basis of evolutionary spiritualism and rational theosophy," end quote. Steiner therefore entered into contemporary materialism and armed himself for his mission. In 1902, he found his battleground and support in the Theosophical Society and became Secretary General of the German section. In 1913, he left Mrs. Besant because of the Alcyone case and founded the Anthroposophical Society. As Schure wrote, quote, "By his first master and by the fraternity to which he was associated, Steiner belonged to another school of occultism, that is, to Western esoteric Christianity, and more especially Rosicrucian initiation. The tradition of esoteric Christianity, properly speaking, is directly and uninterruptedly attached to the famous and mysterious Manes, founder of Manichaeism, who lived in Persia in the 4th century," end quote. Brought up by Magi, Manes became Christian or Gnostic. His doctrine was, number 1, the Master Jesus, prophet of Nazareth, was only the organ and interpreter of the Christ, who was the, quote, arcanum of the planetary word, end quote, the solar manifestation. Number 2, he taught reincarnation and the numerous ascending planetary existences of the human soul. And number 3, what he called evil was only a necessary ingredient in the general economy of the world, a stimulant, a ferment of universal evolution. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. Once again, we see the idea of evolution coming up. This is describing Manes, the founder of Manichaeism, which is a doctrine that underlies some of these occult fraternities. And these are the doctrines he taught. So he's saying that Jesus was only an expression, an organ or an interpreter of the Christ. And they view the Christ as being something totally different than what we Christians do in the mainstream theology involved in it. So they view the Christ as a title, a position, an office to be held, the sort of perfection of man, a station of man, an achievement man can achieve, allegedly, here through illumination, through initiation, through these rites that they give. You can become an ascended master, and you can be Christ-like. You can be Christed. You can receive the office or title of Christ. This is how they view it. It's a title, more than anything. It's a position. A form of evolution, in a sense, in their view. But let's read on. Manes' disciples spread to Palestine, Greece, Italy, Gaul, Scythia, the Danube, and Africa. His doctrine was for centuries propagated by oral tradition, often under different names. Schure writes, such as the Cathari, the Albigenses, the Templars, and the Brothers of St. John of Jerusalem. In the 15th century, esoteric Christianity, inspired by the same tradition, became more laic and scientific under the influence of the Kabbalah and alchemy. And it was about then that Christian Rosenkreuz founded the Order of the Rose Cross. Rudolf Steiner, as a Rose-Cross, practiced and taught Western occultism as opposed to Eastern. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. So now keep in mind, there's two separate streams here of occult teachings. There's the Eastern influences and the Western influences. The Western occultism is what Rosicrucianism is based on, and that is the one that is probably more aligned with Western thinking than Eastern philosophies. The Eastern philosophies that arose in China and throughout much of Asia at the time, these are all attached to other various teachings and secret society groups. And it was the Theosophical Society that tried to grab hold of these Eastern teachings and blend them with the Western teachings. And in so doing, they created a lot of confusion because some of the things don't necessarily align one-to-one. So what they did is they adopted portions of the Eastern philosophies that they liked, that meshed well with the Western philosophies that they liked, and they reinterpreted a lot of things. Now I'm talking about the Theosophical Society. And they totally got a lot of the translations of the Eastern teachings wrong. And in so doing, they transformed them to fit their agendas. And these things have been brought forward today and are still taught today, and they've become perversions of what they originally were. And this is a lot of what is wrong with these secret society groups, because they've all been affected in certain ways by this type of perversion of these older teachings and these older philosophies. And they've reinterpreted them and taught them in ways that don't align with what the original teaching was. And that being the case, we have wrong information that's presented in these occult orders. They've used this stuff, they've weaponized it against the masses, and hidden it from the masses, and made some reinterpretations. Various individuals throughout the course of time have realigned the teachings to fit their worldview and their agenda and what they want. So that being the case, they've centralized many of these teachings to the topmost levels of all of these secret society groups, and there's an inner circle within that inner circle. And they're the ones that make the determination as to what gets taught to the lower level initiates. And these things get carried forward. And in so doing, they've constructed the foundations for what we would call today the New World Order, this political structure that exists in the world today. It's just a tool of these dark occultists at the top of the power structure. Understand that. That's the whole basis here. But let's continue on here. So it says, Rudolf Steiner, as a Rose-Cross, practiced and taught Western occultism as opposed to Eastern. He did not believe in the annihilation of the body by asceticism. It must be trained and become as a magnet, attracting and making use of the required forces. Such is the account of Steiner, his master and work as given by Edward Schurray, the result of yoga, meditation, and processes for awakening the Kundalini, whether Western or Eastern, is the same in all groups working under unknown masters. It means that gradually the master takes possession of the adept's mind and impresses his own will upon it, so that an advanced initiate, such as Steiner, would work under the impetus of the hidden master, and for his ends alone. As the so-called Tibetan master of Mrs. Alice Bailey, theosophist and occultist, New York, explains, contact with the master is recognized by peculiar vibrations, and Bailey describes it first at the top of the spine, second in the forehead, the pineal gland, where the adept's kundalini unites with the master's forces from without. It is the seat of controlled knowledge. Thirdly, at the top of the head, the pituitary body. So then he continues, that's quoting from Alice Bailey, that's how she described, where you could understand how you know that one of these masters, these hidden masters, is in communication with you. You could feel the vibration, folks. That's what she claimed. That it starts at the top of the spine and works its way up through your head gradually to the pineal gland and to the pituitary body. Apparently you could feel that inside your head. Have you ever felt your pituitary gland operating? This is what the claim is here. This is what these people teach, that they can feel the energetic vibration going up into their head, right? So now, then, Shure continues here. In time, the student comes to recognize the vibration and to associate it with some particular great one. For each master has his own vibration, which impresses itself upon his pupils in a specific manner. The forces are these magnetic currents of the universe, that vital fluid, those electric rays, the latent heat in all bodies. Cold and calculating, a master is only interested in a man from the point of view of his usefulness in the group soul and his capacity to help. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks, so think about that. These alleged ascended masters, these human beings that have achieved apotheosis, as it were, or illumination, and have allegedly ascended beyond this plane, that are working within the confines of these spiritual hierarchies to the betterment of mankind. They don't care about an individual. They only care about his usefulness in the group soul, to help, his capacity to help the group soul, or the race spirit, if you want to get a little deeper into their teachings. So this is what these alleged secret masters, these ascended masters, the ones they take control, allegedly, here. Now remember, you do have to take a lot of this stuff with a grain of salt. This is what they teach. This is what they tell each other. This is what they believe within these occult fraternities. They believe that some other power or force takes them over, and maybe they're correct and maybe they're not. But they claim this is an ascended master, takes control of them and uses them for the betterment of the group soul, or the race spirit, to advance the evolution of mankind in some way, to help the evolutionary process here. They're not concerned with individual well-being, just the group, you see. Does that sound like a beneficent type of an entity? Really? Doesn't care if it does you harm, as long as you're useful in achieving their goals and agendas for the group spirit or the group soul. You see? I'll go ahead and I'll repeat that last sentence and we'll just roll through from there. Cold and calculating, a master is only interested in a man from the point of view of his usefulness in the group soul and his capacity to help. The individual is as nothing to him. He is only a part in his world revolutionary machine, to be thrown aside when no longer an asset in their game. Dr. Rudolf Steiner died at Dornach, Switzerland, 30th of March, 1925, slowly but surely burnt out by the terrific forces working through him, and at his funeral, Albert Steffen, poet and president of the Executive Committee of the Anthropological Society, delivered an address. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. So Steiner died in 1925. I apologize, I misspoke earlier and said this book was written in 1922. This book was actually written in 1936. The source they were quoting from in this book was written in 1922. Just to make that delineation there. I apologize. I do try to be as accurate as possible with these things. So I just wanted to make that correction quickly. So Steiner passed away in 1925. And Albert Steffen, poet and president of the Executive Committee of the Anthroposophical Society, delivered an address. Speaking of Steiner's spiritual science, or Christian Illuminism, he said, quote, Rudolf Steiner opened out to us the prospect of a religious life beyond all sects, end quote. 50 theologians went to him seeking a way to unite their work once more with the eternal life of the Spirit, and Steffen continued, quote, Steiner was able to transmit to them the holy ceremony which the priests of the Christengemeinschaft are now enacting for himself. We understand this Christian Gemeinschaft is being revived, run by Heidenreich, with about 400 members in this country. What is this spiritual science? According to Steiner, anthroposophy is a path of knowledge to guide the spiritual in the human being to the spiritual in the universe, holy, cosmic, and astral. End quote. So in his book, this is Steiner's book that they're speaking of now, in his book, translated by Schure, Le Mystère Chrétien et les Mystères Antiques, Steiner writes, quote, in the early days of Christianity, there sprang up in the old pagan world systems of the universe which seemed to be a prolongation of the philosophy of Plato, but which could be understood also as a spiritualization of the wisdom of the mysteries. All these systems had their starting point in Philo, the Jewish philosopher of Alexandria, who said, quote, it is necessary for the soul to come out of the ordinary I, end quote. And that would be a capital I, as in I am. Then it enters into a state of spiritual ecstasy, of illumination, when it ceases to know, to think, and to recognize in the ordinary sense of the words. For it has identified itself with the divine. They have become one. End quote here. He is deified and has lost his own personality. And as Steiner says, quote, God, and it says in parentheses, the creative principle, is bewitched in the world, and it is his own force that is needed to find him. This force, and it says in parentheses, sex force, must be awakened within you. Such were the teachings which the Mystère received before initiation, and now began the great drama of the world of which he made a living integral part. The aim of the drama was nothing less than the freeing of the hidden God. Where is that God? God is not, but nature is. It is in nature that he must be found, for he is enshrouded in her as in an enchanted tomb, end quote. And that was quoted from Steiner. So Rudolf Steiner, once again, like all of these other people, throughout all of these secret society groups, also believes that the creation is the exterior representation or manifestation of God, that everything's connected. We're all one spirit. We're all fractal pieces of God. And there may be an element of truth to some of that. But the thing is, God and nature, creator and creation, are being seen as co-equals here. And I don't think that's the case. This is kind of a type of denialism of a creator of sorts. The creation itself is the creator, and that is not what aligns with Christian theology or many other theologies, and it doesn't align with common sense thinking either, does it? How can a creator be in and of itself a created thing? Can you create something and be that thing? Think about that. That's what these people teach, that God created everything, and that this everything was God, created itself, just was self-evident, self-emanating, was always here, was formless and void, and it was only through the advent of what came to be known as the great architect of the universe that made order out of this chaos, and that would be Lucifer. To these people in these secret society groups, they see that as the deity here. And the deity, they don't equate to the creator. They equate it to being a portion of the creation itself that brought about order and began to shape some of the chaotic, pre-existent stuff that was already always here, allegedly here. So this is a different way of thinking than what we're accustomed. Right? But this is what they teach in the secret society groups. And this, if you want to get down to theological doctrine here, is the teaching that the creation is God. The creature is God. This is very different from the actual reverence of the Creator himself, God himself, who exists outside and beyond the scope of this creation. Now, can he interact with this creation and intermingle throughout this creation? Why, certainly, yes, he could. But that does not mean he is the creation. Do you understand the differentiation? They don't make that differentiation here in the mystery schools. They teach that God, that nature, in and of itself, is the same thing. Okay? And this is a totally materialist paradigm way of thinking. And this also lends credence to the idea that there is no absolute standard of right or wrong then. Do you understand the importance of that? Because if the creation just is, and it is the Creator, and there are only these subjective type of ways of thinking for human beings as far as morality goes, then there's no absolute standard of right or wrong, as long as it falls within the bounds of what works in the laws of physics. So can they do something according to the laws of physics? Or can they transform the laws of physics? Well, if they do, they see this as being the way of expressing their own godhood, in a sense. And this puts them beyond the bounds of any type of morality. They don't believe in the absolute standard of right or wrong. They do understand that there are some inherent natural laws that they need to abide by in certain ways or find ways to skirt around, which they do often within these mystery schools and secret teachings. So that being the case, they don't see that as being a problem. And this is where it eventually leads. Okay, it leads to the idea that anything goes and that your will is the most important thing when you reach a high enough level of initiation here, or illumination as they call it. The will. Do as thou will is the whole of the law. That's what they believe. That's what Aleister Crowley said. And a lot of Crowley's stuff, his ideas were all lifted from others too, within these secret society groups. He gets credited with a lot of things, but he wasn't the inventor of these ideas. He just merely expressed them and became a popular figure in the counterculture movement of the 1960s, which was absolutely insinuated into the public consciousness to affect the world mind in certain ways and to steer them towards these ways of thinking. So that is absolutely what it is. So we see here that even Steiner, even though he claimed to be a Christian illuminist, or was heavily Christian leaning in his philosophical take on things, and he did have some various disagreements with a lot of the theosophists, so he's parted ways with them and founded his own group. But he thought in the same way here. Okay, he equated the Creator to the creation, made them co-equals. That's not the case. All right, that's where I think we run into a little bit of a problem. And this is why their nefarious plans don't always work out. Because they go against the natural order of things that God instituted here. Because God is the sovereign. He's the Almighty above and beyond all of this creation. Beyond all created things. And they could never achieve that. But see, in order for their agendas to be fruitful, or to be even possible, they have to think in terms that they themselves can be the gods of this place, that they are co-equals with God, because if they are forced to admit there is some greater power beyond them, then they might be held accountable for their actions, and they certainly don't want that. They don't want to have to think in terms of being accountable to some higher being. So they try to position themselves as the higher beings here, and these are the belief systems they've pushed forward today. And it's all based upon a lie born in the pit of hell, and told in the Garden of Eden, back in the book of Genesis. You can be as gods. You see, it's all the same thing, all across the board here. But let's continue on. That's enough of my little sidetrack there. Here we have the pantheistic god Pan, who is merely the creative principle in all nature, including man, the life force. Remember the force, folks. Did you think George Lucas came up with that? Nope. It was all in the mystery teachings from the oldest of times. As Clements of Alexandria said in speaking of the greater mysteries, here ends all teachings. One sees nature and things. Further, Steiner explains, the cross of Golgotha is the whole cult of the ancient mysteries gathered into one fact. Christianity, as a mystical fact, is a degree of evolution in the wisdom of the mysteries. End quote. So I'm going to pause for a second there, folks. So that's what Steiner was teaching. That's what Steiner believed. He believed that the cross of Golgotha is the whole cult of the ancient mysteries gathered into one fact, that Christianity is a mystical fact, and it's a degree of evolution, not only in the wisdom of the mysteries, but of mankind. Now, Steiner taught that Jesus, or the Christ, as he would refer to him, was able to achieve something no other human being had ever achieved before or ever will again, but there is one greater that's coming. This is what he taught. This is what they all teach, one greater than Christ. And Christ made it possible for mankind to ascend to the next level. This is what he taught and what he believed, but he also taught that there was one greater coming, and that we were going to receive a greater initiation at some later point here. This is what they all teach, and this is what we would call in Christian theology the Antichrist. But let's continue on. So, continuing on here from where it talks about, where it says Steiner explained Christianity as a mystical fact. So the author here says, this again is Manichaeism, which looks upon the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension of Christ as mystical experiences. A lecture given by Steiner at Oxford in 1922, The Mystery of Golgotha, throws further light upon his spiritual science. Now, Steiner was also a Rosicrucian, and in explaining this mystery of Golgotha, he based his ideas upon certain words said to have been written in the book T, which, according to the Rosicrucian mystical legend, was found on the breast of Christian Rosenkreutz at the opening of his tomb in the 15th century. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So, Christian Rosenkreutz has never been proven to be an actual person that ever existed. It's a personification of a principle, much like Hiram Abiff is to the Masons. This is the same figure. It's the same allegorical reference point being made here. It's become more of a myth. Now, maybe there was an actual living person, maybe associated with the name, but that's not the mystical figure of whom they're teaching. So these reports, these mystical legends, they're nothing more than that. Mystical legends that Christian Rosenkreutz's tomb was found and opened in the 15th century, and this book was in his pocket or on his breast, right? This is what they claim, and this is what these words that were based upon, allegedly here. So it says, these words were, and I guess this is Latin, ex Deo nascimer in Christo, or Jehoshua morimur per spiritum sanctum revissimus. From God are we born, in Christ or Jesus do we die, through the Holy Spirit we rise again. That is through the Gnostic Trinity, Father, the Creator, Son, or the Solar Christ, the Logos, or Serpent, the vivifying force, the Holy Spirit, the Great Mother, which reproduces all things. The whole is the eternal creation, destruction, and regeneration as applied to Illuminism. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. So this is the Gnostic Trinity, or the Holy Trinity of Rosicrucianism or Illuminism. The idea of the solar principle, the Logos, as the vivifying force, the force, folks. The Holy Spirit as the Great Mother, which reproduces all things, Mother Nature. So we have the Son is the Solar Christ, or the Logos. We have the Father, which is the Creator. So Creator, Logos, and Holy Spirit. And this is what it breaks down to in the Gnostic teachings. These are how the Gnostics view it. And like I said, there are some good elements mixed in with a lot of these teachings and a lot of these things. And there may be some spiritual truths to some of what they do teach. But at the end of the day, the well is poisoned, folks. And all it takes is a little bit of poison with the things that they teach. And this is wherein lies the distinction, because I just reviewed for you what it is that they teach within these secret schools. What even Rudolf Steiner taught here, that the creation itself is self-manifest and therefore is God, and therefore we are God, essentially. So this is what they teach. So they're teaching that this is what man is. Man is the creator, you see. Man is the creator. The creation is the creator. And this is not a logical point to make here. But this is what they believe. They believe they could become the gods of this place through the use of their intellect. This is what they teach. This is what they believe. And this is equated in this holy trinity of the Gnostic teaching, the Illuminism. And it is the eternal creation. It goes through destruction and regeneration. That's what it is. It's cyclical in nature. And there's some truth to the cyclical nature of things. Like I said, there are some good informational things and factual things that they do teach, but oftentimes they give it just the twist to suit their agendas that doesn't align with the reality of things. But they do their very best to manufacture the reality into the reality they want. And that's what they've done here. They've lied to themselves about the nature of things, and they believe the lies they've told to themselves about it, and they try to make those lies manifest. And that's what these secret societies are all about. But let's continue reading. So in the RR at AC, which would be the I forget what RR stands for. Something about the something right of AC. Well, this is a subgroup anyway. I forget what the initials stand for, but this is a subgroup of the Golden Dawn system. Okay, this was one of the foundational teachings. The Stella Matutina was an organization that was a sub-organization of the Golden Dawn organization. That's what they're referring to when they're talking about the RR at AC. I forget what the abbreviations stand for. But the whole point here is in the RR at AC, which under the late Dr. Felkin was closely allied to Steiner and practiced some of his processes, and eurythmy for awakening the Kundalini. The 5=6 ritual dramatically depicts the meaning of these words, and I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So this individual is naming specific rituals within this order that many of us probably have no clue about, and honestly, I don't know what this 5=6 ritual exactly is, but they give a description herein, so let's listen to it. So I guess it's an awakening process for the Kundalini energies of the person. This 5=6 ritual dramatically depicts the meaning of these words. And here's the words. Quote, "The aspirant is led to the tomb wherein lay the chief adept in full regalia representing Christian Rosenkreutz. The tomb is opened and the aspirant demands, 'Out of darkness let light arise.' From within the tomb a voice is heard, buried with that light in a mystical death, rising again in a mystical resurrection, cleansed and purified through him our Master, O brother of the Rose and Cross. Seek thou the stone of the wise." The stone is the quintessence or pentagram, Illuminism. And that's end quote. So that is the actual ritualistic ceremony to which is being referred here. And I would assume that has to be a Rosicrucian ceremony. As illustrated on the lid of the tomb, these mystical experiences represent the adept as a Christ crucified. On the cross of light, or Illuminism, the great dragon, Leviathan, the Kundalini, rises up to Daoth, and from above descends the lightning flash, attracted by and uniting with the serpent within, linking the adept with the universal life force without. He becomes the Yeshua Yod He Shin Vow. He, the pentagram, or deified man, losing his selfhood. It is the Rosicrucian chemical wedding. It is thus described by the Jewish writer Kadmi Cohen in Nomades. Quote, abyss and pinnacle, the dizzy height of the one set off the unfathomable depth of the other. Who will ever know the unspeakable sufferings of the ascension, the mortal terrors of the fall, but also the ineffable joy, superhuman, divine, to be upon the peak which overhangs the universe, beyond good and evil, above pure practical reason, to be man, to be self, who equals himself to God, who wrestles with him, who absorbs him. It is Israel, it is Ishmael who supplies these men to the world, end quote. So did you catch all of that? So essentially, what they're saying here is that man loses his selfhood. So it's all about the losing of the individuation of people. It's all about the group mind. It's all about collectivism. And now, do you see where some of these political ideologies stem from? Collectivism, communism, the state, the group, the welfare and the good of the group, the greater good. You see how they work this stuff together. Let's continue on here, reading. His god is the god Pan. He is intoxicated by the astral light. Shure explains that Christian Rosenkreutz left, quote, 3 spiritual truths, end quote, to his disciples, and that these truths were only scientifically proved 4 centuries later. Namely, and pay close attention here, folks, because this will tell you how they've manipulated mankind through these secret society groups. So they're saying here that these truths were only scientifically proved 4 centuries later. Namely, number 1, the material unity of the universe by spectrum analysis. Number 2, organic evolution by transformation of species according to Darwin and Haeckel. Number 3, states of human consciousness different from the ordinary state by hypnotism and suggestion. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks, and point out these are the groups that brought forward some of these ideas. The ideas of trying to quantify everything, coming up with the periodic table of elements, that's what they're talking about, the material unity of the universe by spectrum analysis. The unification of elements into atoms and molecules and breaking it down into these various constituents. Everything's made of matter, of these same pieces of matter, these atoms, whether it's a molecule or an atom of hydrogen. And hydrogen basically is the most simple form that we see, and any combination of protons and neutrons and things like that form the other elements here. This is what they're talking about, how this came to being. So, that being the case, we could understand this is one of the teachings that they manipulated and inculcated into society to match their mystical beliefs and views that they wanted to impose upon the world mind. Number 2, organic evolution by transformation of species according to Darwin and Haeckel. So we have this physical evolutionary process. You see, they've always been obsessed in the secret society groups and through the mystery schools with the idea of evolution. And although it was originally a spiritual concept, well, they've materialized it here in the material paradigm in the physical world now through the teachings of Darwin and Haeckel. They hold Haeckel in high regard. If you're not sure who Haeckel is, this is a guy who very early on was the one that pointed out that a developing human fetus, and he did different drawings through different phases of the process of the development of the fetus. This is the one that popularized the idea that when a fetus is still developing, in its early stages, it has gills. Well, that's been absolutely proven false. But this is what he taught, and he gave the drawings that are still used in textbooks today, which, by the way, are not accurate at all. And they know this, but they still use these drawings in textbooks today. This is the guy who did it, Haeckel, and he was a staunch supporter of Darwin and Darwinian ideas. So Darwinian evolution is a faulty theory at the very best. So that being the case, it's a slippery slope here, but this is what they've instituted, and now this is what they call science, even though it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. And many of the things they based it upon, including Haeckel's drawings and Haeckel's observations, which have since been proven to be false, this is what they base the teachings of Darwinian evolution on, are these kind of principles. And they still push it forward today. And this is why. Because they want the world mind to align with their agendas, you see. And their agendas are very much this. Then it also goes on here to say, number 3, states of human consciousness different from the ordinary state by hypnotism and suggestion. This was a hugely important thing in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This whole idea of hypnotism and animal magnetism as presented by Mesmer and others. There were some real foundational things that were learned from that, and we have the development of the science of psychology that came out of many of these ideas through that kind of time frame. And they saw certain states of human consciousness as being attainable here that are different from what they considered normal. And they were able to quantify these things in certain ways now. This is what was different than it had been in the past. They were able to quantify this. And you always hear me talk about the importance of quantifying something. If you could quantify something, then you could control it easier. And that's what they're all about. It's all about control with these secret society groups. So let's continue reading here. As the power used by Rosicrucians was said to be the magnetic fluid in man and in the universe, set in motion by concentrated thought and willpower, one can easily believe that such initiations under unknown masters might mean hypnotism and suggestion. The spectrum is the resolution of light through the prism, and as the Rosicrucian ritual says, quote, colors are forces, and the signature of forces, and child of the children of the forces art thou, end quote. The Rosicrucians work with colors and geometrical figures representing the forces of the planets, the signs of the zodiac, the elements, etc., and the colors of the planets are the spectrum of the Rosicrucian divine white light, that magnetic fluid which slays and makes alive. Steiner talks much of planetary hierarchies, archangels, angels, etc., but there is reason to believe that they can one and all be reduced to nature's universal forces. For the O equals O ritual of the Stella Matutina says, quote, for by names and images are all powers awakened and reawakened, end quote. I'm going to repeat that line. For by names and images are all powers awakened and reawakened. So I'm going to pause for a second there. So understand, those in the occult fraternities, they understand the power of a name, the power of an image, and this is how they believe that universal forces are brought into being or brought under control, is through the use of a name or an image. If you name something, that gives you a sort of power over it, doesn't it? If you can identify it, this is another form of quantifying something. Something that previously didn't have a name, if you give it a name, well, now it has an identity, and you know what it is, you can identify it, and in a sense, that gives you some measure of control over it. Because in its pre-existent state, before you could name it as a thing, you didn't know what it was and didn't know how to describe it to another person. So you could not bring about awareness of its existence to somebody else if you didn't know what it was, if you didn't have a name for it. But now that you've given it a name, now you can explain what it is to somebody, you see. So this gives the same kind of idea here. Same thing with an image, and this is all about symbolism, symbology, these effects that these things have on the mind. Let's continue on, though, and we'll wrap it up here pretty soon. Therefore, it is not Steiner's spiritual science, merely the hermetic fixation of the astral light in a material body, illuminism linking the adept as a tool to some white occultists, supposedly working for the well, or is it not rather the woe of humanity? As expressing Steiner's communistic political dreams and schemes, we have his threefold state. As a symbolic basis for this, the threefold state, Steiner takes the human organism, number 1, the system of the nerves and senses, the head system, number 2, the system of breathing and the circulation of the blood, the rhythmic system, number 3, the organs and functions of matter changes, the metabolic process. So according to Steiner, these systems, comparatively speaking, function separately. There is no such thing as absolute centralization in the human organism. In order to thrive, the social organism, like the natural one, requires to be threefold. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So Steiner said that the human being, his physical body, works in a threefold manner. Then you have the nervous system, you have the circulatory system, and you have what would be the metabolism, the metabolic system. That all three of these separate functions of the body are not centralized, that they work all together, but they're not centralized. They work separately from one another. So he says here also, he makes the connection that socially, the social creature, that is man, the social creature would have to function in a similar way. So let's go ahead and continue reading here. So according to Steiner, these systems, comparatively speaking, function separately. There is no such thing as absolute centralization in the human organism. In order to thrive, the social organism, like the natural one, requires to be threefold. So the social organism he describes here, number 1, economic life, relatively as independent as the nervous or sensory system within the human body. Its concern is with everything in the nature of production, circulation, and consumption of commodities. The second one, number 2, the public rights political life, or the state, applied to a community possessing common rights. Then the third one, mental and spiritual life. Everything that rests on the natural endowment of each single human being, spiritual and physical. All are apparently separate, yet interdependent. Alongside the political sphere and the economic sphere in a healthy society, there must be the spiritual sphere, functioning independently on its own footing. That is, religion, teaching, art, and intellectual life, and even technical and organizing capacities as applied to the state or industrial economy. It is the threefold line of evolution towards which modern humanity is striving. At the end of the 18th century, under different circumstances from which we are living today, there went up a cry from the hidden depths of human nature for a reformation of human social relations, stirred up by the Illuminati and the Grand Orient Lodges. Through all the scheme of the new order ran like a motto the three words, fraternity, equality, liberty. Admitting the equality and liberty are contradictory, Steiner is in sympathy with all three and applies them to his threefold state. Economic life, in the form of associations, is combined under brotherhood, the state under equality, and the spiritual field under liberty or freedom. And he says, quote, no social state constructed on an abstract, centralized scheme can carry freedom, equality, and brotherhood pell-mell into practice. But each of the three branches of the body social can derive its strength from one of these contradictory ideal impulses, and then all three branches will work fruitfully in conjunction. End quote. Such is Steiner's, as it has been called, headless threefold state. And this he would further extend in the same headless way to a threefold world state. Quote, such a close interweaving of interests will grow up as will make territorial frontiers seem negligible in the life of mankind. The forces to which nationalities owe their growth require for their development free mutual interaction untrammeled by any ties that grow up between respective bodies of state and the economic associations. And the way of achieving this is for the various national communities to develop the threefold order within their own social structures, and then their three branches can each expand its own relation with the corresponding branches of the other communities. In this way, peoples, states, economic bodies become grouped together in formations that are very various in shape and character, and every part of mankind becomes so linked with the other parts that each is conscious of the life of the other pulsing through its own daily interests. A League of Nations is the outcome arising out of root impulses that correspond to actual realities. There will be no need to institute one built up solely on legal theories of right, end quote. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So notice he says a League of Nations. Where do you think that name came from? Directly out of the occult fraternities. The League of Nations. And also, he makes some statements here that sound like diversity, inclusivity. All of these ideas, don't they? Don't we see that going on in the world today? It's all about inclusivity, diversity, acceptance, all of these things. If you have all that, all of these groups of very different people can coexist through different cultures and societies at the same time, woven together into the whole fabric of things, all together towards common purpose here, with some type of a threefold state put into being here. Let's continue on. Finally, he says, there must be but one human race working at one common task, willing to read the signs of the times and to act in accordance with them. The whole is just another form of Mazzini's associate, or Mrs. Alice Bailey's world state by means of unification under the control of some mysterious supermen. This dream of a world state is far from being new. We know that Weishaupt's initiates had to take an oath swearing to help to their utmost the foundation of a universal republic, and at the end of the 18th century, the Illuminatus anarchists, Klutz's plan was, quote, all peoples forming only one nation, all the trades forming only one trade, all interests forming only one interest, end quote. Steiner was an Illuminatus said to have been linked to those who, towards the end of the 19th century, revived Weishaupt's Illuminism. He was therefore apparently carrying on the tradition in his threefold world state. Moreover, with regard to intellectual interconnections necessary for this world state, we might quote the report from 1928 to 1929 of the Society for Cultural Relations between the Peoples of the British Commonwealth and the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, in which it was noted that the Anthroposophical Society, that would be Steiner's society, was one of the organizations in contact with it. A British government blue book thus describes this socialist or Society for Cultural Relations. Quote, the Communist International favors it as a fertile ground for communist propaganda of the intellectual variety, end quote. And there is little doubt that today every nation is conscious of the Soviet life, pulsing through its own daily interests, largely detrimental and disintegrating economically, politically, and spiritually. To take another phase of anthroposophical teaching and practical application of its beliefs, in December 1932, Frau Lily Kalisko, a leading member of the Anthroposophical Society in Stuttgart, came to London to lecture to an agricultural group of the society, which proposed to revive ancient astronomical or perhaps astrological customs common among primitive people, adding to them apparently the science of anthroposophy. Her theories were that plants and vegetables sown at the correct moon phase grow faster and more luxuriantly than when the moon phases are ignored, that the earth breathes rhythmically, and that sowing, fertilizing, and harvesting crops can be worked into this rhythm. Further, that plants requiring much moisture grow a great deal better than when planted 2 days before the full moon, and those requiring little moisture during a waning moon. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So, like I said, there is some good, accurate information in here for many of these things, and I think this is part and parcel of that. These things have been tested and proven true, these kind of ideas, and they're still practiced today by agriculturalists. So, at any rate, the author here goes on a little side tangent about that, but the author's going somewhere with that, so bear with us as we continue on here. It seems unrelated, but really, it gets to the next point here. So, Pierce, in his textbook of astrology, tells us that more rain usually falls during the increase than during the decrease of the moon, as was proved by many experiments throughout the years 1868 to 1881. Again, the ancients have said that oaks cut down in the springtime, when the sap is rising, soon rot. All timber trees should be felled during the winter solstice and the last days of the moon. Then the timber would last in perpetuity. Practically, this is affirmed by R. Reinel Bellamy in his book The Real South Seas. He says of the Kanakas of New Caledonia that they maintain that the flow of the sap is upwards with the waxing moon and downwards when it wanes. They plant maize, beans, etc. before the full moon and root crops after. Timber for building purposes they fell during the last phase of lunation when the sap is at its lowest. As for the rhythmic breathing of the earth, they no doubt refer to the great breath, or swara of the universe, the life force, Pingala, the positive or sun breath, Ida, the negative or moon breath, and the Sushumna, the central or uniting fire. Going to pause for a second here, folks. This comes from Eastern philosophy, these three words, Pingala, Ida, and Sushumna. Sushumna. I can't even say it. Excuse me for that. So this is a principle taught for meditative practices from some of the Eastern traditions. So let's continue on. There are also the 5 tattvas of refined matter: ether, air, being gaseous, fire, igneous, water, liquid, or earth, solid. The whole process of creation on all planes of life is said to be performed by these tattvas in their aspects of positive and negative. All these phases follow and merge into each other in regular and continuous procession. They are the basis of all magic, black or white. They are nature's finer forces, but not spiritual or divine, except as instruments, the creative principle in all nature. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So this is some important information which has been identified here. These are some of the natural forces that play in our world. And the author here acknowledges that they're not divine, except as instruments of the creative principle in all nature. So these are natural forces. These are not forces from the Creator. These are not spiritual, divine forces. These are the natural processes which the Creator put in place. This is natural law. Okay? These are the laws that govern this reality that we live in, this creation that we live in. So this is an important thing here they've pointed out. They said this is the basis of all magic, black or white. And this is also showing how they contradict themselves, because they claim that this power, these are the natural forces, the positive and negative aspects of these different elemental forces, and this is the basis of all magic. But they say these are inherent natural forces, that these are not divine powers or forces, you see. So, if that's the case, if they believe that nature is God and God is nature, would not natural forces be divine forces? So do you see how they contradict themselves in a lot of these teachings? And yet they don't question that, do they? They throw logic out the window when it comes to this stuff a lot of times. But let's continue on here, and we're almost finished. We'll wrap it up very soon. Again, to repeat what we have previously said, speaking of astrology among the Chaldeans, Dollinger wrote, quote, "These men found a support in the Stoic philosophy, which, starting with the principle of the substantial identity of God and nature, had come to look upon the stars as eminently divine, and placed divine government of the world in the immovable course of the celestial globes." End quote. In the time of Alexander, the astrologers of the Chaldean and Alexandro-Egyptian schools were spread over Asia, Greece, and Italy, and taught that a secret influence from the planets descended uninterruptedly upon the earth and man, and that by magical cults and astrological prayers, these planets could be acted upon, and their forces directed as required. In Illuminized orders, such as the RR et AC, or the Order of the Golden Dawn, as this is a subcategorization of that, these planetary influences are invoked or attracted by the Jewish symbol of power, the six-rayed star, and the higher grades are given at the various phases of the moon. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So they're talking about some of the principles of magic associated with astrology, and they identify here that there are some of these inherent natural forces that affect this place. And they see these forces here that act upon us from the sky clock. From the sky, they view these as secret influences of these planets upon man that can be manipulated by man. Here it says through the use of magical cults and astrological prayers of sorts, they could influence these energies or manipulate these energies. They absolutely acknowledge this in the secret schools. That's why it's such an important concept to understand, that we need to get back to looking at the stars and understanding the different forces at play here. Because these dark occultists at the top of the power structure, they absolutely understand some of these principles and utilize them against the masses and keep these things hidden from the masses. And these are things that have been demonstrated through some of the literature here. So let's go ahead and read on here, because the next portion it says, in Ode and Magnetism, that's OD and Magnetism, written in 1852, Reichenbach wrote, quote, "The element of odic force is thus radiated towards us so abundantly by sunlight and moonlight that we can lay hold of it at our ease and make use of it in simple experiments. How unbounded its influence is on the whole of humanity, and even on the whole animal and vegetable kingdoms, will be proved shortly. Ode is accordingly a cosmic force that radiates from star to star, and has the whole universe for its field, just like light and heat." End quote. This ode, or as the Rosicrucians say, magnetic fluid, is the universal life force generated by the sun and reproduced by the moon, which can be used for good or perverted for evil. In support of what we have written above, we find the following in the program of the Anthroposophical Summer School, held at Tetbury, August 1934. Quote, "Dr. C.A. Merpt will hold classes dealing with the anthroposophical conception of agriculture. The subjects will be as follows: the soil as the work of cosmos and earth, the soil as a manifestation of the evolution of the earth, etheric formative forces in plant and soil, the true nature of manuring, the animal kingdom as manifestation of the astral world." End quote. Here we have the cosmic forces of the stars and the magnetic forces of the earth. It is the basis of all the old pagan cults. It is the ancient Chaldean astrological lore, and that of the old Rosicrucian medical herb growers. Added to it all is the modern science of manuring. Further, Steiner, like the learned botanist of his youthful days, claimed to be able to see the vital or life forces in the plant, to arrest these forces and use them as required in his healing. Hence his new therapy, and the British Walida Company, Ltd., for dispensing the results of the anthroposophical medical research incorporated in 1925. By some, it is maintained that this anthroposophical agriculture is based not on astrology, but astronomy. Yet Steiner's astronomy is spiritual science, And it appears to be a reversion to ancient and Eastern beliefs when nature's forces and phenomena were everywhere looked upon as active and ruling gods, sometimes good and sometimes evil. In Anthroposophy, Michael Maas, 1928, Eve Reed writes of this astronomy and explains that behind the veil of the past and nature, the stars reveal themselves as colonies of spiritual beings. 9 stages of hierarchies towering above man. Together they have formed and governed the world and man under a world spirit. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So once again, we see that they have this conception of a cosmological hierarchy of sorts of spirits, and that there's a world spirit that unites all of us here in this place, and it is the evolution of this world spirit that the ascended masters essentially work upon, according to these teachings. Like I said, you have to take a lot of this stuff with a grain of salt. There's no way to either prove nor disprove any of it, and I do think there are some good factual bits of information that can be garnered from some of this stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of good teaching, but there's also just that hint of poison in a lot of it as well. And we need to be careful, and we need to be very discerning about that. I think we could have a better understanding of cosmic mechanics by looking at things from these older cultural perspectives, as shown here. But also, at the same time, I see how it's been misused by these secret society groups, how they've kept much of this information hidden from the public and weaponized it against the masses in certain ways. And it's all about the centralization of power. It's all about acquiring power for themselves and furthering their own particular agendas in the way that they want. So anyway, let's continue reading, and we'll wrap it up here very soon. In order that man should develop, these beings were seemingly withdrawn, and man was abandoned to mechanical laws. Quote, "Yet in this mechanism, as in all natural phenomena, spiritual beings are working. The fact that in spring the plants come forth from the soil, that blossom and fruit appear, and that the plants wither away in autumn, the fact that when here we have autumn, spring begins to burst on the other side of the earth, all this is brought about by the nature spirits, the gnomes, undines, sylphs, together with the salamanders," end quote. So this is the personification of these forces at play, these natural forces. They describe them as elementals, and we've done some shows in the past on these elementals, covering these ideas. And these are some of the things, these natural forces that are manipulated by these dark occultists who run things in this world. They don't want people to have an understanding of this stuff. They don't want you to realize that if you plant your crops 2 days before the new moon or the full moon or whatever they said there earlier, that they will actually grow bigger and be healthier and give you more production. They don't want you to understand those basic things. You see, there was an actual science to a lot of this. It's not just all backwards thinking and superstition and stuff as we've been taught to believe. There's actual methodologies of the very old ways that really do work. Early man was not as dumb as we make him out to be in this modern age. Let's put it that way. In fact, he knew a whole lot more. The average man of that age knew a whole lot more than the average man of this age about the workings of nature. Let's put it that way. But let's continue reading here because we're just about out of time and I want to wrap it all up. Thus, in the Stella Matutina, 4 of its ceremonies end with the prayers of these nature spirits of water, air, earth, and fire, very beautiful as a piece of art, taking one back to childhood's wonderful fairy tales. Later, for the intellectual development of man, Ahrimanic beings were sent to consolidate the earth and veil spiritual reality. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. So these Ahrimanic beings, they represent matter, or gross materialism, the hyper-materialist paradigm in which we're living, that element of our society wherein these controllers of this place want us to think in strictly physical terms, that everything is strictly the byproduct of some physical cause and effect situation here. You see, they want you to believe that consciousness is nothing but the byproduct of the chemical electrical activity of your brain and brainstem, and that all phenomena here are likewise just products of some natural cause and effect system here in the physical world, and nothing more. That's what this Ahrimanic influence is all about, trying to steer people's minds into this gross materialism. And that is the world we're living in today. That's where our minds are being steered to think only in strictly physical terms, the here and now, that this is all there is. There's no spiritual world or no spiritual concern beyond this place. And this is the paradigm they've been trying to create here. And we've been falling ever further down into this paradigm in society at large. But let's continue on and we'll wrap it up. Yet again, it is said that man and nature were, from the very beginning, fashioned according to the laws of rhythm and periodicity, and the law of gravity held sway over the earth. Finally, as Steiner said, quote, "When we observe the life of the world of stars, we are beholding the bodies of the gods and ultimately of divinity itself." End quote. This once more seems to reveal the pantheistic nature of Steiner's whole teaching, the bewitched God enshrouded in all nature, the Jehovah of the Kabbalistic Jew, the creative principle. According to Steiner, the gods of the sun, moon, and Saturn, this creative principle manifested in the body of Jesus of Nazareth as a Christ impulse, the serpent power of the yogis, the logos or serpent of the Gnostics. And the fact that it was possible for the Christ impulse to enter humanity was brought about by the ancient initiation principle becoming historical fact. In From Sphinx to Christ by Edward Schuré, the French and Jewish exponent of Steiner's neo-Gnostic Illuminism, we are given an account of this ancient pantheistic creed as applied to the Christ of the Christian Church, de-Christianizing and Judaizing Christian beliefs, making Christ merely a super-deified man. The Sphinx represents the prepared body, offered in sacrifice, into which the Christ impulse was to descend. The whole means the rise and perversion of the sex force and serpent within man, attracting and uniting with the lightning flash or solar Christ impulse from without, controlled by unknown directors. It is called initiation. According to Schuré, quote, "It was still necessary that, from birth up to the age of 30, when the Christ would take possession of his human habitation, the body of Jesus should be refined and harmonized by an initiate of the highest rank, one who had passed through many incarnations, so that a man almost divine should offer himself up as a sacrifice, a consecrated vessel to receive the God-made man. Therefore, it is said that Jesus was a reincarnation of the high initiate Zoroaster. Later, the Master Jesus was placed under the instructions of the Essenes, a fraternity of initiates who lived along the shores of the Dead Sea, where finally the voice within told him, quote, 'Thou hast laid thy body upon the altar of Adonai, the Lord of the universe, like a lyre of ivory and gold. Now thy God claims thee, that he may manifest himself to men. He seeks thee, and thou canst not escape him. Offer thyself as sacrifice. Embrace the cross.'" End quote. Then followed the initiation, the baptism, in the Jordan by John the Baptist, of which Schuré writes, quote, "It is forbidden to help the one who was being baptized to leave the water. The belief was that a breath of the divine Spirit entered into him through the hand of the prophet and the waters of the river. The majority emerged from the test revivified. Some died. Others became insane as though possessed. These were called demoniacs." End quote. As to the Master Jesus, quote, "He is aware of a sensation of drowning, followed by a terrible convulsion, and for some seconds he sees a chaotic picture of his whole past life, then the darkness of unconsciousness. The transcendent self, the immortal soul of the Master Jesus, has left his physical body forever, and he is received back into the aura of the Sun. At the same moment, by an inverse movement, the solar genius, the sublime being, whom we call Christ, entered the abandoned body and took possession of it, animating with new fire this human lyre that had been prepared through hundreds of generations." End quote. So I'm going to pause for a second there, folks. This is what they believe happened with Jesus. They don't believe he was born divine, that he came here, he was flawless. he had a divine birth or anything like that. They think he was just some initiate who was somewhat holy that was willing to sacrifice himself, through which the Christ impulse was able to manifest when he turned 30 and started his public ministry. This is what the claim is in these secret society groups, and they claim he was further trained by the Essenes, and some claim that he actually went to the East and learned from some of the yogis in Tibet and various other places, and there's actually no historical proof or documentation of any of that. It's all just said to be channeled information by these later groups. And these are the things they teach and they believe. And do you understand, do you see how it differs from what we're told in the Word of God? In the Bible, in Christian theology, you see the dichotomy of thought here. They teach something totally different in these secret society groups. And it's not based upon any kinds of factual information at all. It's based upon the word of these ascended masters, these channeled ascended masters, allegedly. So understand the deception being played here. Let's continue on, and we're going to finish it up here. Lightning flashed from the sky, and as he emerged from the water, his whole body bathed in light. A luminous dove appeared above his head, the mystery of the eternal feminine, the spirit of divine love, transformer and vivifier of souls, to be called later by Christians the Holy Spirit. Then came a voice from above, "This is my beloved Son, today have I begotten him." This version of the words is, Shure says, to be found in the early Hebrew Gospel. It works better in with his idea of the cosmic Christ. The object of his mission is the spiritualization of the world and of man through love and the opening of the mysteries to all who may aspire to them. This is illuminizing as though through the innumerable mystery sects of today. Now, this whole account might well be the history of the preparation and initiation of the many illuminized tools now being used in the widespread universal movement of today. As in the baptism, so in these initiations, some died, some were illuminized, losing their personalities, becoming controlled by some unknown master, as for example one Krishnamurti of the Theosophical Society, Octavia of the Panacea Society, and many others. The illuminizing power was the Gnostic Trinity, the Father, the generating force, the Holy Spirit, the Great Mother, the reproducer, the Son, the cosmic Christ, the manifestation of the creative principle, the illuminizing force of all Gnostic and Kabbalistic sects. Shure further holds those in opposition to Mrs. Besant that this Christ will not again occupy a material body, but will appear to such adepts who have astral vision, just as in the House of Wisdom of Cairo, the adepts were taught that Mohammed, their prophet, could be contacted spiritually through meditation on the mystical doctrines. Also, in the RR et AC, which was closely allied to Steiner's group, their mysterious master latterly appeared astrally to many members, masquerading as a Christ, demanding from the adepts complete sacrifice in service to the great world movement. And Shure says, quote, according to Rosicrucian tradition, the spirit which spoke to the world in the name of Christ and through the lips of the Master Jesus is closely related to the ruling star of our system, the sun, end quote. This Christ impulse is therefore a compelling power, manipulated by these invisible directors, and the initiate penetrated by this force becomes merely the negative reproducer of the ideas and actions set in motion through this impulse. Under the mask of initiation, he becomes diabolically possessed. And I'm going to end it right there, folks. That gives you an idea as to what they teach. They open themselves up to these spiritual impulses, these forces, that claim to be ascended masters of some sort, that claim to be some type of Christ principle in some aspects here. And this is what they teach and what they believe. And they also teach about this world movement, that all of these beings that they allow to take possession of their bodies or their minds, as it were, they are unified in this world movement idea, this creation of a new world order, and they have infiltrated into political positions and instituted this threefold state idea across the board for the social creature that is man. And it is because of this that we have the political goings-on today that we have. It all relates together. I know a lot of people will think a lot of this sounds like a whole lot of nonsense. But at the end of the day, when you realize there truly are many of these secret society groups running the show at the topmost levels of the power structure, whether that be the political structure, the economic structure, or the religious or spiritual structure, the threefold state, as defined by Steiner here. When you realize this, that they run the whole thing, they're steering us in a certain direction, and that is absolutely to the advent of Antichrist, what the Bible describes as Antichrist, the New World Order, this ruling elite. So understand a few things here. If you take nothing else away from this, and not to say that all of these people that get involved with these secret society groups have bad intentions or anything, I don't think that's the case at all. I think a lot of them are just misled and misguided. And once they get in too deep and realize what they've gotten involved with, it's too late for them to back out now, or they face some terrible penalties. Some of them have even been murdered for revealing some of the secrets, as is the case with Freemasonry and some of the other ones. So that's the thing. So this person who put this all together was an insider who recognized this stuff going on, didn't necessarily like it, decided to adopt a nom de plume called Inquire Within to write this down and put all this information together, compile it together, and put it out there for public consumption, to do with what we will. And it's recorded for posterity's sake here. And we can see the many machinations of this overarching control group, this spiritual influence that binds things and controls things in this world, directs things. And we're being led down that road, and we see it going on today still, and we need to be aware of what it is and how it's being done. And this is absolutely how it's being done, is through the use of these secret society groups infiltrating into various aspects of society and influencing it in certain ways. From the top-down structure, the pyramid structure, the pyramid scheme. This is the original pyramid scheme, folks. Let's put it that way. So now we've explored the idea of the threefold state and how it relates to the New World Order. Absolutely the same hallmarks of the political action going on today in the spiritual. Anyway, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I hope this was informative. I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good night now.